Okay, and that little thing will go up there and you can tell it's recording. Okay, cool. So let's start with negative feedback today. So what we were talking about last time was basically that the body spends most of its energy trying to maintain homeostasis in what? Extracellular or intracellular fluid primarily? Extracellular. Okay, so I know we did this last time, but now I want you to say it instead of me say it. So somebody raise their hand and tell me why. Why extracellular primarily instead of intracellular, in your words? Go ahead.
Because everything that the extracellular goes through in the intracellular.
Right, so whatever happened to the extracellular is going to happen to the intracellular. That's one of the reasons.
It's a lot easier to regulate one fluid versus a bunch of little cells.
Right, exactly. Go ahead.
It's easier to catch pathogens and like bacteria.
Earlier instead of late. Go ahead, Charles.
Extracellular can go throughout the whole system.
Yeah, it goes throughout the whole system. How about efficiency and cost? That was the other one, right? It's like not just easier, but it's also more energetically expensive and more energetically less expensive and more metabolically. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk sort of about the mechanisms that you use to maintain homeostasis in those fluids. Now, here's the deal with today. The stuff that we're talking about today is not going to be outrageously unfamiliar to you, but it is fundamental to the rest of the semester. So if you have memorized it before, today I want you to try to understand it. And if you don't understand it, I want you to ask questions. And if you don't understand my examples, you need to ask questions about my examples because this is really going to be your predictor for the entire rest of the semester. And I want you to get a good baseline about it. So we're going to start by saying, okay, the goal is homeostasis, right? The mechanism that we are going to use to maintain homeostasis is primarily called negative feedback, which I know that you've heard before. And in order to understand negative feedback, first thing is please dump your prior associations with the word negative, because it does not mean bad in this context. And it doesn't even mean less than, okay? What it means is with any variable, let's talk about body temperature for a second. In order to maintain homeostasis, if my body temperature goes up, in order to maintain homeostasis, negative feedback will oppose or negate it, right? So it'll bring it back down. But that also means that if my body temperature goes down in order to maintain homeostasis, negative feedback would do what? Bring it back up. So it's not directionality, it's opposition, right? It's like whatever direction it's going, we are going to oppose it in order to maintain homeostasis. Got it? So that's what negative means in this context. So the purpose is to restore any regulated variable to homeostasis if the variable gets disturbed. Does that make sense? So the deviation from whatever the normal value is opposed or resisted or negated. And then the value is returned. And I don't know if you guys have thought about this before, but here's a question. Is the value trying to get back to a set point or is it trying to get back to a range? So let's talk about body temperature for a second. My body temperature goes up. Let's say, what number do you have memorized for human body temperature, a normal one? 98.6. Okay. So my body temperature goes up to 101. Right? Either because of fever or because I'm working out or whatever. It goes up to 101. And of course, negative feedback is going to oppose that and try to bring it back in. But what is negative feedback actually trying to do? Is it heading for 98.6, a set point, or is it heading for a range? It's heading for a range. I know we memorize 98.6 because it's easier to memorize than two numbers. But if you think about it with the efficiency, if like in my home, I have my thermostat set to 72, and every single time it goes up to 72.4, the air conditioner comes on, and every time it goes to 71.6, the heater comes on. Can you see how much that would cost me and how ineffective it would be, right? So what we have, even though we memorize a single number, what we have is actually an acceptable range around that number. Does that make sense? Okay. So we'll talk about set points and ranges again. Okay. So what I want to show you is like, what you're going to see a whole bunch during physiology. You're going to see a whole bunch of graphs. And quite a few of those graphs will track what happens to a regulated variable over time. So we're going to look at what a typical graph of negative feedback would look like over time. Remember, what we're trying to do is to maintain homeostasis. And so let's just start with body temperature. We'll talk about other variables today too. But you, of course, know that a body temperature is a variable that you're trying to maintain homeostasis with. You know that if your body temperature gets too low, your cellular processes cease to function. If your body temperature gets too high, your proteins start to denature. So we spend a hell of a lot of ATP monitoring it. So we're going to do temperature, and we're going to do it in degrees Fahrenheit because I don't know Celsius, because I'm American. Don't know Celsius or the metric system, so we're definitely going to be ahead in science for a long time. So where's my other? Do you see another black one of these? Oh, there it is. I was collecting them under there. Okay, so but we are going to measure body temperature over time, and this is important, although it's small. Okay, when you draw a graph, remember, and you've heard this before, the x-axis is the independent variable and the y-axis is the dependent variable. So the way that this is set up, this says that body temperature varies over time, yeah, which is true, right? If I flipped it, it would say that time varies with my body temperature. Like my body temperature causes time to vary. Literally the worst superhero power ever, right? Like, oh, if I just increase my temperature, I can slow down time, right? Be like the worst X-Men power ever. Okay, so what we are going to do is we're going to do an imaginary 24-hour cycle with a person who gets every damn thing done over the course of the day that they want to, and watch what their body temperature does over the course, right? So we know that what's probably going to happen is it's going to have an average of about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's not always 98.6. If you live with another human, you know that their average body temperature is probably not the same as yours, right? So that's the time average mean for a whole bunch of people. For you, it might be slightly different. But let's just make this person totally typical, except for the fact that they're going to be way more efficient than we generally are. So they're going to get everything done over the course of a day, and we're going to watch what happens. So what do you predict about your body temperature before you wake up? It's going to be relatively low. Your metabolic activity is relatively low, and also your activity level is relatively low. So it's going to be below 98.6. It'll probably still be within the healthy range, right? It's not going to be like 70, right? It's going to be below 98.6. So you're going to get up, and you're going to make yourself breakfast, right? You're going to eat your breakfast. Let's say you have kids. You're going to run around, chase them for a while, right? And then you're going to take them to school, right? It's a good day, right? So you're also going to get 30 minutes to yourself to do whatever the heck you want before you have to go to work. How often does that happen? This is a perfect day. Okay, and then you are going to go to work, and you're going to have a wiggly job, okay? And then you're going to have lunch, right? And then you're going to sit down on your butt and do the non-wiggly part of your job. Then eventually you're going to drive home, and if it's like a 30-minute trek, your metabolism's going to drop as you're just sitting in your car, right? Then you're going to get home, and let's see, what are you going to do? You're going to make dinner, you're going to eat dinner. I forgot, this is coffee. Whee! So you're going to make dinner, you're going to eat dinner, you're going to put the kids to bed, you're going to sit around and watch TV. Then it's a good day, right? You're going to get all your crap done, you're going to have sex. There you go. So this is a good day. Turn your phone off. Okay. All right. So what we see occurring here is predictable variability. We're never going to go up to 106 degrees. We're never going to go down to 70. We're also never going to stay at 98.6 for a very long period of time. What we're going to end up getting is we are going to see a range that it seems like I'm trying to stay in, because every time I get to the bottom of it, it seems like I'm trying to pop back up. And every time I get to the top of it or above it, it seems like I'm trying to get it back down. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's a question for you. Obviously, this person goes out of the healthy range, right? Is this person diseased? Okay. So that means that you're telling me, based on intuition and being a person who's been a person for a while and has been paying attention, that obviously pathophysiology is not defined by leaving the range. Unless, of course, what? You would have to stay out of the range. Yes? So if my body temperature went up to 102 and didn't come back down, right, after I finished exercising, for instance, then I might be in a patho situation. Or, for instance, let's say it's Halloween and I got 6 Butterfingers, and I ate all freaking 6 Butterfingers, right? Or actually, the little Reese's, they're my thing. I love those things, man. It's a perfect ratio of peanut butter to chocolate. So you eat a whole bunch of those. What happens to your blood sugar? Well, it spikes. But I'm not in a pathophysiological condition, so what's going to happen to my blood sugar after that? It's going to drop, exactly. What happens to a type 1 untreated diabetic after they eat all of those Reese's? Stays up. Does that make sense? So you always leave the range, right? But health means you pull yourself back in. Quickly or slowly? What do you think? Relatively quickly. You pull yourself back in relatively quickly. So that's what happens with negative feedback over time, and you could change the variable, and although the number might change, you would see a predictable trend, right? It would pop out, and then you'd pull it back in, and the healthier you were, the less time it would stay out, right? Okay, so let's talk about how you accomplish this. So now we know the goal is homeostasis, and the mechanism is negative feedback, meaning that whenever it goes too high, you push it back down. Whenever it goes too low, you bring it back up, right? But that it's not magic how this occurs. There are anatomical parts in the body. They're all working toward this. And these anatomical parts are collectively called a reflex arc. And so the reflex arc is basically going to do this. Let's talk about it, and then we'll show this picture in just a second. So here's the deal. Okay, in order to fix this, right? So let's say the person worked out. In order to fix it, what you have to have is the capacity to assess it. So you're going to have receptors or some way of detecting this stimulus. Yes, detecting a change in this stimulus. That makes sense? Quite often we're talking about sensory receptors when we're talking about that. They could also be chemoreceptors that are measuring levels of chemicals. Everybody okay with that? So the stimulus is the thing that you are measuring, right? The receptor is going to be capable of assessing a change, detecting a change in that variable. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so here the sensory receptors would be temperature receptors that could detect changes in temperature, yes? Do you have any idea where your temperature receptors are in your body? You may or may not know. You've got them in your brain. These are super pissy. You can't get your brain too hot. Skin, yeah. You've also got them in your blood vessels that are assessing the temperature of the blood plasma. And you've got them in your tissues that are assessing the temperature of the interstitial fluid, because extracellular fluid will, of course, affect everything, right? So you got them a whole bunch of places. Everybody good with that? So I've got these sensory receptors, but I have not solved the problem just because I've detected a change, right? So the next step is to take that measurement and send it to some place that knows what to do with it. And I do that by sending it through an input pathway or an afferent pathway, okay? Remember, afferent, the word afferent is generally heading towards some centralized structure. So in this particular instance, the input or afferent pathway would be via the sensory part of the nervous system. Everybody okay with that? And I'm going to send it to the central nervous system. Okay? Now, you may or may not know, but let's talk about it. I'm talking about body temperature. Where I'm going to send it is I'm going to send it to a place in the central nervous system this time. It's not always CNS, but quite often it is. I'm going to send it to a place in the central nervous system that has the capacity to do this. It knows what your body temperature should be, yes? It can assess the difference between the measured and the ideal body temperature and figure out when that error signal is big enough to do something about it. That make sense? So if you sent an input in that said, you want 98.6, I'm at 98.7, doesn't mean you need to do anything about it, right? You want 98.6, I'm at 102, right? So basically what it does is it stored your ideal and it knows how much of an error signal from the ideal is acceptable. Does anybody know what the integration center is in the human body for temperature? Yeah. If you ever can't figure out what does something in phys, guess hypothalamus. So now you got all the answers for phys, right? You got homeostasis, cellular respiration, hypothalamus. You passed. Okay, so it is the hypothalamus. So what the hypothalamus does is it assesses the measured temperature and compares it to your set point. You actually have a set point in there. We don't speak hypothalamus, so the closest we can get to the set point is your average body temperature. So it compares, and if the error signal is big enough, then what it's going to do is do the next part. So let's say you're at 102 and 98.6 is what you wanted. That's generally going to cause a response, right? So what we're going to do is the next part is to start fixing it, because we still haven't fixed it, right? We've just said it's broken, okay? So now we have to send the signal out another pathway, and this is called the efferent or output pathway. Yes? In this instance, it's still nervous system. It doesn't always have to be. The efferent pathway goes to anything that can effect a change, and those are called effectors. Okay, so for high body temperature, the effectors would be what? Vasodilation. So make your blood vessels vasodilate because you can send the hot blood to the surface and cool it down like blowing on soup. What else? Sweat glands. Can also make you sit the hell down if you were running. You're like, you're too hot. You're like, oh, I'm sitting down, right? So you can change things. You know, of course, sweat glands and that kind of stuff you already know, but there are others. Basically anything that can help with that change. Yeah, everybody okay with that? We have to make a circle, okay? So what we've made is an arc. They should call it the reflex circle because you have to complete the circle, otherwise you're going to create a problem. So if, for instance, I send it out the efferent pathway to the effectors and I start sweating and I vasodilate and I drop my body temperature, everybody with me? Am I not going to create another problem unless I know when to stop that? So now what I have to do is use that new stimulus to feed it back into the system. Yes? And how far do I go when I feed the stimulus back into the system? I want you to think about this. So I feed the stimulus back into the system. It has to be detected by the sensory receptor again, right? Doesn't it? Because how are you going to know when you're done? And then does it have to do the afferent pathway every time? Yeah, because it has to go to the integration center for the next assessment every time, right? Only now the error signal is small enough to be acceptable. And then you don't have to do the output part every time. Does that make sense? Okay. So concept check question for you. With this, does anybody want to hazard a guess as to why, even though you don't do the output part every time, you are doing the first three almost constantly? Like, why do you not, for instance, measure your body temperature every 45 minutes?
Too much energy.
It would be expensive. And what was your, yeah?
Things can change within minutes.
Yes, things can change very, very quickly. Can we all acknowledge that it's really, really expensive to measure it and test it all the damn time? But it's also potentially life-saving. And in addition, if you let your body temperature go up to 104, isn't it pretty damn hard to bring it back down versus 99 or 100, right? So part of the reason you spend 60% of your ATP trying to maintain homeostasis is that you never get to stop checking it even if it's not broken, right? You always have to continually do the first part, the input, the assessment, the input, the assessment. You just don't always have to do the other part. Does that make sense to you? Okay, go ahead.
So once you get back into an acceptable range,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't the integration center have to send out a path or an output to stop the previous thing?
Yes, it generally does have to send one out to stop the whole thing, right? And then after it's stopped, you continue.
Then you stop
Yes,
the
exactly.
output.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as soon as you have corrected it and know that it's corrected, you stop the whole thing, right? And then you leave it stopped by default until you need to start it again. Is that good? Okay. All right. So this is called a reflex arc. Not all reflexes arcs use the nervous system for the efferent pathway. Not all reflex arcs use the integration center as the brain or part of the brain. Believe it or not, you can use hormones through the bloodstream for these pathways as well. Okay, it's a little slower, yeah, but it can work. Okay, so what we're going to do now, here is a reflex arc. It just doesn't have all of the parts in it. And we're going to talk about blood glucose too. We're going to talk about blood glucose and the whole reflex arc associated with it. Okay, so before we get into some specific examples, I want to talk about feed-forward mechanisms. Now, if you look at the word feed-forward and the word negative and the phrase negative feedback, it kind of implies that they're opposite one another, but they're not, okay? So feed-forward is really what we call anticipatory homeostasis. It's getting a jump on things that you do very regularly all the time. So listen to this so you don't get confused in the future. Okay, so if you're a really, really regular person, then your body starts to be able to predict what is going to be needed in the future. So if, for instance, B always follows A, B always follows A, B always follows A at exactly the same time every day, sometimes your body will try to do B before A even occurs because it's like, I know A is going to occur. Let me just help you because you're going to need this metabolically. Does that make sense to you guys? So here's an example. Are any of you guys those kind of people that are super regular about when you go to bed and when you wake up every day? Okay. I am not one of those people. I admire those people. When that happens, what happens is your body has a really good capacity to predict when your metabolism needs to rise and when it needs to drop based on your activity patterns and when you go to sleep and when you wake up. So these two right here, if they're super duper regular, and let's say they go to bed at 10:30 every night and they wake up at 6:30 every morning, okay? And then they decide, I'm not an old man, I'm gonna go on a bender and I'm gonna stay up until 3 a.m. What is going to happen? You're gonna get exhausted at about 10 every night, and you're going to have to medicate yourself with caffeine if you want to stay up past that. Okay, and then you're going to go on vacation, and you're going to go to Bali, right? And you're going to be like, I'm going to sleep all damn day on the beach. What's going to happen to you at 6:30 your time? You're going to wake up, exactly. So this is anticipatory homeostasis, and what happens is your body decides if you're super duper regular and it gets it right 80 to 90% of the time, it's just going to give you a little jump. It's going to say, you're going to need your metabolism to be really high in 5 minutes. Let me just sort of start it for you now, so you'll be more efficient when you get going. So that's called a feed-forward mechanism or anticipatory homeostasis. You only get the benefit when you're really, really regular. Now, there are other situations in which this can occur. For instance, if you walk into grandma's kitchen and you smell chocolate chip cookies baking, what's your anticipatory homeostasis response? You are going to start to salivate, and then she's going to slap your hand and tell you it's for Relief Society, right? And you'd be like, you just wasted some ATP. Give me a cookie, damn it. Don't say damn it to your grandma. Does that make sense? So now, will that start to get extinguished slightly if every single time you don't get a damn cookie? Mm-hmm. Yes. The response will start to lessen if it's no longer efficient. It also works with sexuality. Like if you see someone that you usually get to have sex with looking like a sexy person about ready to have sex, then you can have a sexual response, right? Except if every time she looks sexy, she smacks you upside the head with a frying pan and says no, will it eventually dampen the anticipatory homeostasis response? It totally will dampen the anticipatory homeostasis response. The guy in the last class thought of this, and it's never occurred to me before, but the whole Pavlov's dog thing was basically conditioning an anticipatory homeostasis response with stimulus, response, stimulus, response, stimulus, response. Eventually, you release you take away the reward, but you still have the stimulus response for a while until it's actually extinguished. Does that make sense? Do you guys know about Pavlov's dog? Okay. Okay, so does that make sense? So that's feed forward. Feed forward is basically anticipatory homeostasis. You get the benefit of higher efficiency when you're super duper regular. I don't think I ever get that. I'm not really regular about anything. I have to as a grown person, I have set alarms on my phone to tell me when to drink water, when to floss my teeth, when to take my vitamins, and how many push-ups I'm supposed to do every day. And I do them. I let myself be bossed around by now. Okay. It totally works, man. And because I'm kind of competitive against myself, I don't want to drop below an A. It lets me know when I have an A on each thing. I'm like, oh, I can't get below 93%. Got to take my vitamins today. And my husband's like, you are weird. I'm like, I don't get graded anymore. I want to get an A. Okay, so now we're going to talk about types of negative feedback. Okay, we're just giving some specific examples now. Again, negative feedback serves to oppose something when it goes out of the range, right? And we're trying to accomplish what with negative feedback? Homeostasis. And now we're going to give you two different brands of doing it. We're going to give extrinsic regulation and intrinsic regulation. There are two different ways of accomplishing the same thing. One of them is if I have a problem in a body system and I handle it in-house, I have a problem and I can fix it, right? What do you think that is, extrinsic or intrinsic? Intrinsic, yes, you can handle it yourself. The other one is if I have a problem that I cannot handle and I need to call a friend. I need to call on another body system, usually the nervous system or the endocrine system for help. That one is called extrinsic. Ready? Now we're going to look at a couple of examples of each. Okay? By the way, the one that we just looked at, the one that we were just talking about with body temperature was extrinsic. you had this external change that caused something and you couldn't handle it unless you involved the nervous system. So let's talk about this one. Let's talk about extrinsic regulation. So which one do you think is faster, extrinsic or intrinsic? Intrinsic is faster. Which one do you think is more robust or more powerful? Extrinsic. Okay, so let's do extrinsic first. It's pretty robust, it's pretty powerful. The two places that you are most likely to call in for help are places that can send your message long distances. Because extrinsic, a disturbance happens with the body system, but we have to call on other body systems to help. The two long distance communicating body systems are the nervous system and the endocrine system. Does that make sense to you? So I have a problem here. I need to call someone else to help. So let's look at a couple of examples. You ready? Okay. Generally, this is long distance communication. Extrinsic is. The description is the nervous system or the endocrine system will adjust the activities of cells or tissues or activities of another body system. Okay, so here's the example. Let's go back to eating 6 Butterfingers. Okay, I have an older brother that fed me coins. He also ate all my damn Halloween candy unless I kept it in a safe place. Guess where's safe to keep it? Right here. Eat all 6 Butterfingers because you got a big brother. So you eat all 6 Butterfingers and it's going to have the digestive system cause a disturbance that the digestive system cannot adequately fix. You can't poop it out fast enough, and even if you threw it up, the glucose would have already been absorbed, right? Does that make sense? So I need help. I need another body system. I have massively disturbed my blood glucose. Yes? Massively disturbed my blood glucose. I'm not going to die. I'm not a type 1 diabetic. So what's going to happen is I am going to need to start a reflex arc that will involve an input pathway that takes the glucose to actually the pancreas. And then the pancreas says, that's too damn high. I know what your glucose is supposed to be. And then it says, oh, okay, I'm going to help you. I'm a different body system. I'm the endocrine system. And I'm going to help you by releasing insulin into the bloodstream. And that's the output pathway, insulin going into the bloodstream. Okay, you with me? Okay. And what it's going to do, objective, is to lower the blood glucose. It's going to go to effectors all over the body, the output pathway. And does anybody know what glucose does to your cells, the vast majority of your cells? What does it do? Not glucose, insulin. Insulin does to your cells, the vast majority of them.
It
Causes them to take up glucose. And if you take up glucose into the cells, what happens to your blood glucose level? It drops back down. Does that make sense? Okay. Digestive problem, endocrine helps solve it. But again, it won't help at all unless we feed it back into the system because our glucose will continue to drop. So now what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to feed that new glucose level back in to the system as a new stimulus. It's going to go back to the pancreas. The pancreas is going to assess again. Yeah? And it's going to say, that's cool. And then it's going to do what you said, which is know when to stop releasing the insulin. Does that make sense? Okay. So questions for you too. Can you see that this is negative feedback? Yeah? And then the second question is, can you see that it's extrinsic, not intrinsic? Yeah? Because it's using another body system to manage something that happened with a different one. That makes sense? Okay. So just because I want you to make sure that you are not in the habit of thinking that negative feedback always brings variables down, let's make sure we can do the opposite example. And the opposite example is when your glucose disturbance is because of fasting. So I don't care why you fast. You can fast for religion. You can fast because the doctor told you to. You can fast because you're starving. You can fast for whatever the hell reason. Either way, you are creating a digestive system disturbance that you either can't or won't fix with the digestive system, right? You're not going to eat, okay? We still need to fix the problem, right? So what we're going to do this time is the disturbance is the error signals in the other direction, right? It says your blood glucose is way too low. Now, insulin would not help this problem, would it? No, it would not help this problem. So what we're going to do this time is the pancreas is going to assess again. It's still the integration center for glucose, yeah? And this time it's going to say that's too damn low, and it's going to do a different output pathway because I want a different response. This output pathway is a different hormone called glucagon. And glucagon you can remember because you need it when your glucose is gone, okay? And it goes to the effector or the target that is your big storehouse for glucose. What is it? You may know? Glycogen where? What's the primary site? Liver, exactly. Yes, Your liver stores boatloads of glycogen for the rest of the body. It goes to the liver, and it says break down glycogen, dumps glycogen into the bloodstream, right? Does that make sense? That's your output pathway, isn't it? Sorry, I said glycogen. Dumps glucose into the bloodstream, and now that glucose feeds all the way back, right? And the pancreas assesses the level again and says, that's cool. And it says stop releasing glycogen, or stop releasing glucagon, sorry. Everybody good with that? Okay, so same questions. Can you see that that's negative feedback even though the variable is going up? Yeah? And can you see that it's extrinsic? Yeah? Okay. Now, let's go back and talk about that challenge question one more time. The challenge question said something about the cardiovascular system. Was it blood pressure? I can't remember. Okay. Your blood pressure was low, cardiovascular problem, and then the nervous system stimulates the heart in order to bring the blood pressure back up. So now let's address it again. Can you see with that example now that that is extrinsic or intrinsic? Extrinsic. And is it trying to accomplish negative or positive feedback? Yeah, right. You got it? Right? It's extrinsic. Go ahead.
Just with, so if there were to be a disturbance within the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
so the extrinsic or
It would generally be considered extrinsic because it's using the nervous system, although people don't usually ask you that about nervous system stuff. That's a good question. I won't nitpick you about things that like are nervous and like, okay, so I've got anxiety and then my brain releases GABA to calm me back down. Is that extrinsic or intrinsic? It's nervous. So the nervous system kind of regulates everything. So I would never ask that question. It's a good question. I think it would probably be a little bit of both because it like will also change everything else about your body. It'll like make you go to sleep. It'll drop your metabolism. It'll do a bunch of things. It's a good question though. I like it. Okay, so that's fasting. Now let's do a couple of intrinsic examples. Ready? So this is a problem that you can handle in-house. Okay, you've got a disturbance and you have the capacity to handle it in-house. This metaphor, the metaphor that I like to use for this one is, if somebody robs my house and I'm just a me, do I like go out searching for them or do I call the cops? I call the cops. That's extrinsic regulation, right? And now I'm a gangster or a gangsta. I don't really care which kind. Either one. I don't care. You can tell that I'm obviously from the hood. I am a redneck, but it was a trailer, not the hood. So if somebody robs a gangster, do they call the cops? No. The last class, the guys drive by. That's what they do. And I was like, skip some steps, man. I was just going to go have a conversation. So no, if you handle it all in-house, right, that's intrinsic regulation. So these guys have the capacity to handle it in-house. So let's talk about a couple of intrinsic regulations things. Intrinsic regulation is also called auto-regulation, right? Handling it yourself. Or local regulation, because you usually don't have to go very far to make it happen, right? Okay, this is generally short distance communication, so it's probably going to be, again, faster, slower, faster. Is it going to be as robust? No, it's not going to be able to make as big a changes, but it might be quick, right? What do you think about expense? Which ones do you think is more likely to be expensive? Extrinsic, yeah. So usually what happens is if intrinsic is a possibility, we try that first, and if it fails, then we move on to extrinsic. So let's look at an example of intrinsic. Okay, cells in one tissue, but not the whole body, need more oxygen. Okay, so you've got a tissue that's really metabolically active. Here's an example. You did 6 shots of tequila last night. Your liver needs lots of oxygen. The rest of you is just laying on the couch and doesn't need a damn thing. The same thing would happen if you took a 6 acetaminophen last night. It's just not as fun, right? And never ever do those at the same time. Do you guys know that? Never take Tylenol for a hangover because they are both super duper hard on your liver. You can actually get dead that way. So either way, whatever your story is, tequila makes a better story. You're laying on the couch and the rest of you is doing nothing, right? But your liver is really metabolically active. And so you need more oxygen in your liver because you need to do cellular respiration. Exactly. You need to do cellular respiration. All right. So you need to do cellular respiration in your liver. So your liver cells are like, help me. right? And they release chemicals, and they just release them locally, and they're called paracrine chemicals. And those chemicals cause dilation of local arterioles leading to liver capillary beds. And that'll take care of the problem, right? Get you more oxygen into the liver, right? And as soon as the oxygen is adequate in the liver, then they stop releasing chemicals, and then you go back to your inherent level of constriction. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is an example of negative feedback. Oxygen was too low and you brought it back up. Do you see that it's intrinsic and not extrinsic? Okay, what if this failed? What if you were like so incredibly sick that your liver was still not getting enough oxygen? Have you ever gotten so sick that your heart rate goes up and your respiration rate goes up? So if intrinsic fails, sometimes you will go to plan B, which is extrinsic, and call in the big boys, right? Call in the nervous system and the endocrine system to make bigger changes. But you usually try the cheap, fast one first, and almost all of your tissues have the capacity for intrinsic regulation, at least a little bit. Is that okay? Okay, and then the next example nobody likes, but I want you to learn it now because you're gonna need it all semester long. Okay, so this is a little bit of a long story, but it's also involving cellular respiration. Okay, here's the deal. As any tissue gets more metabolically active, it's going to generate more carbon dioxide. If the body as a whole is metabolically active, it's going to generate more carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the byproduct of cellular respiration. If your cellular respiration is fast enough, your respiratory system will automatically start blowing off more carbon dioxide. So let's see how that works. And this one is a bit of a stretch for intrinsic, but you can see that it's definitely not extrinsic. Ready? Okay, so here's what happens as your metabolism really goes up, and that is that your carbon dioxide concentration will go up. That's cool. And then carbon dioxide can always find water to interact with because we're 60% water, right? It's ubiquitous, okay? And then this will go to H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. The problem with acids is if you let them sit around in solution, they're going to drop off a what? Hydrogen ion, exactly. So this is bicarbonate ion, okay? And so that means that as your carbon dioxide goes up, right, your H plus goes up. What does it do to your pH?
Drops.
pH drops. Okay, now here is how this will fix itself. As soon as the blood that's going through your lungs starts to drop in pH, it will automatically, without asking the respiratory system or the endocrine system, it will automatically increase your respiration rate. Does that make sense? Which will do what to your carbon dioxide? You'll blow off more of it, which will do what to your pH? It'll bring it back. Does that make sense? Okay. You're going to see this equation all semester long, like 10 different times. Because we see it in the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and then we see it again in the kidneys, because the kidneys can force it that way and make you pee out the H plus if you're too acidic. Does that make sense? Did you have a question?
Yeah. How does it do that without talking to the respiratory system?
Oh, the receptors are in the respiratory system, and as soon as the respiratory system actually detects a change in pH, it doesn't have to go through the central nervous system to cause a response. It's an immediate stimulus response without asking permission. Does that make sense? Okay, so you have chemoreceptors in your respiratory system that are detecting changes and can cause responses without asking the medulla oblongata for permission. Now, there are many situations in which you ask the medulla oblongata for permission, and those are in like the carotid sinus and the aortic arch, but I'm telling you, in the respiratory system, as soon as the pH starts to change, that alone can make small changes in respiration rate. If you have a big pH problem, you're going to have to ask for help. If you have a big pH problem, you'll ask for help. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so you will see this equation all semester long. This is the bicarbonate reaction. Hopefully you'll learn it quickly because then it won't torture you all semester long. Okay, so how many of you guys hate pH? Some Yahoo decided, instead of making it easy for everyone, that the pH was the negative inverse log of the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. And so it's counterintuitive for everyone, right? That as your hydrogen ion concentration goes up, your pH goes down, right? But of course you need to know it. It's going to be important in phys, right? So let's just talk about it briefly. If your pH is below 7, you are what?
Acidic.
You are acidic, yes. And if your pH is above 7, you are? What's the other word? Alkaline, yeah? Okay, yeah. And so one of the major ways, but not the only way, that we will manipulate pH in the human body is to manipulate carbon dioxide concentration. But that's not the only way. There are a bunch of different ways of doing it. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so if you need help with pH and you know you hate it and you suck at it, interactive physiology has a good pH practice. It lets you mess with things and figure it out and play with it and figure out what the pH does. So these pages right here in interactive physiology. Anybody even look at that yet? Oh, did you? It's kind of cool, isn't it? I actually really like it. What I'm going to try to do, I haven't asked permission yet for those of you who are, oh, by the way, I posted a free link to interactive physiology under assignments and announcements. It's buggy. It doesn't like some browsers. I am not going to be your tech support on it because you can buy it if you want it to work. But there's a free one there. So you can use that one. In addition, I'm going to try to get it put on the computers at the STEM Center, the Dumke STEM Center, if I can. I haven't asked permission because that thought just occurred to me yesterday. So you can go in and play with it if you don't actually have it for yourself. So I'll work on it this week, trying to get it put on those computers. I'm hoping I'll get them to give it to us for free. Okay, so most organs can be regulated by intrinsic and or extrinsic control, okay? So you usually try the easy one first. So everybody okay with intrinsic and extrinsic? One last time, what's the goal of both? Homeostasis. Okay, so now let's leave homeostasis for just a second and say, okay, now we're going to talk about positive feedback. Positive feedback is the opposite of negative feedback, and its goal is not going to be homeostasis, at least not when it's going on. Okay, so let's talk about that. So if you're looking at a variable and you're looking at a level or you're looking at temperature, let's just do temperature because we looked at temperature before. Okay, so if your body temperature is going along just fine and you're in negative feedback right now, and then you lose control of it, and your body temperature starts going up, but instead of sweating, you start shivering. What's that going to do? It's going to add to the problem. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So in that instance right there, you're in a positive feedback loop in which whichever direction it was deviating, you add to that direction. Does that make sense? Or if your body temperature is going along just fine and then it starts dropping, but instead of shivering, you start sweating, yeah? Then you're adding to the problem when you're in that positive feedback, right? And that, of course, while it's going on, you're not homeostatic, right? You can't be, yeah? So how can that occur? Well, in those situations, quite often you are in a diseased part of the situation. You're in a diseased state. And whether you come out of it or not depends on how healthy you are otherwise, what the hell's going on in the first place, and your age. So let's talk about body temperature for just a second. If I am 3 years old and my body temperature goes from 98.6 to 105 and nobody intervenes, how likely is it that my homeostatic control mechanisms are going to be fine-tuned enough to bring it back down without intervention? No, you know little kids can die and go into febrile seizures from situations like that, right? They can have brain damage. If you are a 25-year-old athlete and you go up to 105 and you don't have any ibuprofen, are you as likely to die as a 3-year-old? No, you might very well eventually grab it and pull it back down. How about if you're 85? No, your homeostatic control mechanisms are not quite fine-tuned enough when you're little, and then they're a little bit broken as you get old, right? So you need interventions far more frequently at the ends of your life. So you can be in positive feedback for a little while and then you can add it back down. The deal with positive feedback is not just that you're going one direction, but that your body is adding to that direction. Does that make sense? Let's talk about nicking an artery. So if I nick an artery and I'm bleeding out, and the variable I'm looking at is blood pressure, what's going to happen to my blood pressure? It's going to drop. But then my heart's going to go, I got you, and it's going to try to help. And what's your heart going to do? It's going to increase its heart rate, and then what's going to happen to your blood pressure? It's going to drop further, right? So what's going to happen in that situation, even with a healthy 25-year-old athlete, is that unless you intervene, the positive feedback loop is going to kill you, potentially. Not all the time, but if it's a big artery, it certainly is. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's positive feedback. Now, is positive feedback always a disease situation? No, it's not always a disease situation. Even though it's not homeostatic when it's going on, there are some positive feedback situations that are normal or good I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I can tell you it's not homeostatic, but it's normal or good. What was your question, Bree, before I go on?
So, would someone like withdrawing off of like a drug, would that be a positive feedback?
A lot of times your homeostatic control mechanisms are broken when you're on withdrawal, and you will sweat when you shouldn't, and you will shiver when you shouldn't. Usually, however, it's not like it is a course in which you'll be in positive feedback and your body will come back out of it.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of times your homeostatic control mechanisms are just kind of broken and they can't manage your body temperature during those times. So yes, go ahead.
So when you're like in shock or like an adrenaline rush, like does that prevent positive feedback?
When you have an adrenaline rush after shock?
Yeah, like when you're like in an accident and you make an artery
Mm-hmm.
and you're not passing out or anything, is that because of
That's a kind of a complicated question. It's a good question. I'm not sure I'm going to do a good job answering it right now, but throughout the semester we'll get a good answer on it. If you get into an accident, first of all, shock means something specific in phys. It means massive drop in blood pressure. What is the thing that stops a person immediately after an accident from going into a massive drop in blood pressure if they are otherwise healthy? It is because massive amounts of adrenaline cause massive amounts of vasoconstriction that stops blood loss. Works really well if you're an otherwise healthy person. If you are not a healthy person and you get into a car accident, what happens is you go into massive vasodilation and then your adrenaline response is not adequate and you can't overcome it. So that's a healthy person can have this period of time in which I'm not dying, right? Because I've got my homeostatic control mechanisms are really good, really functioning well. If you were an otherwise unhealthy person, it doesn't usually work that way. You can get into a car accident, go into shock, and die. Okay, so situations in which positive feedback loops, they're also called cascades or amplifications. They like amplify what's going on. How could that ever possibly be good? Well, it's pretty damn good if once you start something you want to finish it, then you should add to it until it's done, right? So blood clotting is a great example. I'm going to give you guys a quick and dirty of how blood clotting works. Okay, a healthy blood vessel does not have collagen exposed because it's just epithelium on the inside. There's no collagen, right? So here's what happens if you damage a blood vessel and a platelet sees collagen. It's like, oh, collagen, that means it's damaged. And it adheres to the collagen and it starts to attract its friends. It says, hey dudes, come on over here, we need a blood clot. Starts to attract platelets, and then the platelets release chemicals that start clotting, which also attract more platelets, which release chemicals that start more clotting, which also attract more platelets, right? And so you're amplifying and amplifying and amplifying the clotting factor concentration and the platelet concentration until what occurs? Until you plug the hole, right? And you wanted it to go as quickly as possible, because do you want to fart around with blood clotting? No, you do not want to fart around with blood clotting. So when you're in that clotting phase, you're all positive feedback. Until what? Until you plug the hole, right? Heal the vessel, and then you can start to disintegrate all of that and go back into your normal homeostatic levels of platelet factors. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's blood clotting. Another example is birth or parturition. Who wants to stay in labor for 72 hours? Once you get it started, don't you want to be done? Yeah, you want to be done. So here's how labor works if the baby gets to choose when it's born, right? And not the doctor who has a vacation planned, right? So here, a full-term baby will start to release a hormone called oxytocin, and don't get confused, hormones aren't always negative feedback. This one is called oxytocin. This is oxytocin. My husband got this for me for our anniversary gift because it's a bonding chemical. Wasn't that a good nerd gift? So anyway, the baby starts to release oxytocin full term, and oxytocin causes uterine contraction, which causes the baby to release more oxytocin, and the mom to release more oxytocin, which causes more uterine contraction, which causes more oxytocin release, and the uterine contractions get stronger and more frequent until an event occurs, which is boop, parturition, right? So you're in a positive feedback loop with oxytocin concentration and contractions until you're done. Does that make sense? That's why, of course, you can artificially induce labor by giving an artificial version of oxytocin called Pitocin. It's called Pitocin. It doesn't make you bond, though. It just works on your uterus. It actually makes you feel kind of crappy. It's like, I hate all of you, but you had the baby, didn't you? Okay, so there are a couple of other positive feedback normal situations. One of them is generating action potentials. All I'm going to say about generating action potentials is that An action potential is the electrical stimulus that goes along an axon, and it should go about 250 miles an hour down the fastest one. And if you want something to go really quickly, positive feedback is great. So later on this semester, I'm going to remind you when we learn action potentials that they're positive feedback. For right now, I'm just going to say that they are. It takes me about 45 minutes to explain an action potential, and then you'll see why they were there. Also, estrogen secretion, which is kind of weird. Estrogen secretion is a positive feedback loop too. But that one's a weird one, so I don't usually hold you guys responsible for them. Okay, so but of course, most positive feedback situations that you get into are disease situations. And unless there's intervention or unless your homeostatic control mechanisms get control, you might die because of them. So let's talk about homeostasis big picture now. Okay, so why did I take the time to go through all of this? Because what I have just hopefully given you is the capacity to, instead of memorize every physiological situation, to predict a physiological situation. Because the vast majority of them, if a variable goes one direction, you are going to try any means necessary to get it to go back the other direction. And if you can do it locally, you're going to do that first. And then if that doesn't work, you're going to try nervous or endocrine control mechanisms. So that's going to be your big predictor for this semester, is I'm going to try to maintain homeostasis by any means necessary. Always go cheap and fast first. If that doesn't work, go more expensive, right? That makes sense? Now, of course, every once in a while, you're going to run into exceptions, like a positive feedback situation with birth, but it's going to be every once in a while, right? Okay, so homeostasis is the unifying theme of physiology. It is the predictor for physiology. And of course, what we are going to primarily do is we are going to monitor the ECF instead of the ICF, right? We're going to monitor pH in the ECF. We're going to monitor temperature in the ECF. We're going to monitor pressure in the extracellular fluid. We're going to monitor almost everything in the extracellular fluid. And what kinds of physiological variables are you monitoring and regulating with these mechanisms? Almost everything that you can think of. Almost every ion has a control mechanism, a reflex arc for it, or two. Like calcium, you're regulating that right now. You're regulating your pH right now and your carbon dioxide and your oxygen concentration, and they all work in this system. So what you're going to see, instead of 7,000 systems to memorize, you are going to see that each one is an iteration of the same thing that you expected it to be, right? So while you might not know the hormones yet, right, you will know that I predict that there is a chemical that is going to make this happen. And then you just learn the name of the damn chemical, right? And it's way easier than rote memorization, way easier. And then every once in a while, your prediction is wrong, but that's okay, right? Then you just fix your model a little bit and fix your prediction for the next time, right? Okay, so let's talk just briefly about homeostasis. So if homeostasis is maintaining a relatively constant internal environment, let's all make sure that we mean the same thing when we say constant. Obviously, we don't mean unchanging, right? Because we see that it changes, right? So what do we mean? Do we mean that you are maintaining any variable at a set point? You're not, right? You don't stay, your blood pressure doesn't stay at a set point. Now, is there a set point somewhere in you stored for blood pressure? There totally is, but we can't actually get it. So the best that we could get for blood pressure or body temperature is by taking your mean over a long period of time with lots of data points, right? Does that make sense? Take as many data points as I could for her for not a day, but for 2 weeks or 2 months, right? And then I would know what your set point for body temperature probably is close to, right? So that's why we have the means, because the mean is like sort of the middle as far as we can get, the closest we can get to set point, but it's not unchanging. So we'll talk about the set point can be changing. Now, if you guys go into human health, nobody's going to ask you to memorize a mean. They're going to ask you to memorize the ranges, aren't they? Because you don't want to be the person that runs into the doctor and tells her, doctor, their blood pressure is 125/86. No, you are not going to be that person, right? So you want to be the person that runs in and says, doctor, their blood pressure is 220/160. Right? Because you need to know what the acceptable range is. In addition, you also need to know if the person just ran up the stairs, right? Still, the last one's too high for just running up the stairs. Something's going to bust any minute. So what you really do is you don't maintain the set point. The mean is just data, right? It's just a time averaged mean to give you an idea of where the middle of the range probably is. You need to know the range, but what we need to know is that your body doesn't actually maintain constant. It maintains it in a steady state in which it goes in and out of the range in a very predictable way. So although this sounds like an oxymoron, what a steady state is predictable variability. So it sounds like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I'm saying it's variable, but it's predictable, right? It means that I know it's going to pop out, but in a healthy person, I know it's not going to go up to 115, and I know it's not going to go down to 70, right? So it's varying in a predictable way. If at any point could I actually, with pinpoint accuracy, figure out what her body temperature was going to be at a point in the day? No, but I could predict like where it wasn't going to be, right? Pretty sure. Does that make sense? Okay, so what is more likely to be useful information, especially in human health, about a given variable? Set point, mean, or range? Range. And you're never going to know the set point. You're just going to do your very best to sort of predict what it might be. So let's talk about variability. Variability is the norm. Variability within me over the course of a day is absolutely normal. It would be abnormal if I didn't vary. My body temperature, my blood pressure, most variables over the course of a day will not stay constant. Variability between individuals is normal as well. If we go back to body temperature and you live with another human being, you know that your body temperatures are not the same, right? Absolutely not the same. You're like, how the hell can you live in this hot box, right? Or it's freezing all the time. So you have different set points and therefore different ranges. So you're probably going to have to compromise. And I just told my husband that I'm going to keep it as cold as I want. I'm going to drive a hybrid car and put solar panels on top. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to put solar panels on the house. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. So your body temperature won't be the same as other people, but your mean, if I got enough data points, your time averaged mean for almost any variable would be relatively constant. Might not be the same as mine, but it would be relatively constant for you. So you already know the answer to this, but say it anyway. Which is more likely to indicate disease? Variability from a set point, the mean, or the range? But only if it stays out. Exactly. Okay, so the stuff that you guys are doing in lab this week and next week is related to these sort of predictable variability in certain measured variables, certain ions, certain compositions, certain temperatures and blood pressures and all that kind of stuff. And things that vary over a 24 or 25 hour cycles are called circadian rhythms, as in around circadian rhythms. Now, humans, we evolved on this planet with 24, 25 hour days, right? They're not always exactly 24 hours. And so we actually have a pacemaker, an internal pacemaker that is a timekeeper for us and allows us to reset these 24, 25 hour things every day. And of course, it's the what? It's the damn hypothalamus. It's like that big and it does everything. Were you guys totally unimpressed with the anatomy of the hypothalamus? You're like, that? Really, you have to kind of squint to see even where it is. So here's what the hypothalamus does for you every day. It has lots and lots of sensory input going into it. Temperature going in, and you're gathering the information. You're also gathering information about light. And on this planet, it tends to be lighter and warmer during the day and colder and darker during the night. It helps us reset. And then when the hypothalamus decides it is X amount of time, it will tell the pineal gland to release melatonin. And what does melatonin do? Makes you sleepy and drops your metabolism. So if we look at a typical person, this isn't necessarily you or me, we will see that there is a pretty cyclical, predictable variability. So if we start, let's start right here. That is 9 o'clock for this person, right? That's 2100. I'm bad at military time. Okay, his melatonin secretion starts right there. Notice his bowel movements are suppressed. Have you ever wondered why you don't have to poop in the middle of the night? It is because your circadian rhythms tell you it's not poop time, right? And it is primarily hormonal that is telling you it's not poop time. Now, you might have to pee in the middle of the night because that ain't control, but you do not have to poop in the middle of the night. So your bowel movement, and I appreciate this, don't you? I totally do. Here's midnight. Here's his deepest sleep if he goes to sleep at this time. Now, yours might not be like this, but yours is not dissimilar, right? His lowest body temperature is at 4:30 a.m. The sharpest rise, because he's going to get up right around here. is sharpest rise in blood pressure. This is a very regular person, and this right here is an example of anticipatory homeostasis because he hasn't actually gotten out of bed yet, and yet his blood pressure starts to go up, and then his melatonin secretion stops, and then he gets up, right? And notice the poop right there, especially if he had coffee right here, because that's definitely going to help, right? So then your highest testosterone secretion is right there. This is in a male. We have testosterone cycles too. They're just slightly less circadian in females than they are in males. This is a good time to have sex if you didn't have to go to work. That's like always interrupting things. Your highest alertness is right here. Best coordination is when you're at work. What good is that, right? Fastest reaction time still at work. Maybe you can do thumb wars right there, right, in the break room. Greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength is at 5 p.m., so you got to go work out right after work. And then highest blood pressure and body temperature. And then melatonin secretion is going to be the same again. Now, yours will be different. Part of what you are going to be doing is gathering data about your own variables over the next week or so. And they used to ask you to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the morning. She took that part out of the lab because they're like, what would you do? I was like, I'm pretty sure it's probably this. And I just wrote it down. Like, I'm not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So here's what's going to happen next time. We will finish this set of notes and we will start the next one. And you're going to have it's just going to be a short quiz over this material with a challenge question over the material we haven't yet covered. Okay? Challenge question won't count, but hopefully it will encourage those of you who give a crap to read the material. Cool?